He stood before the war and knew it as he never imagined in a violent intimacy. Her embrace would tear his muscles and break his bones. He would stop in Avdiivka, fighting over a cemetery where bodies were a masterpiece of horror in the open air. The Brazilian went to Ukraine with years of training shaping his body and spirit. Haiti and the favelas of Rio honed his reflexes and sharpened his mind. None of that would be enough preparation to shield him from the horror he would witness in Avdiivka. Vidivka was hell, the place where the devil materialized his dreams on earth. There, the souls of the soldiers were tested until the very last moment, walking over frozen bodies, seeing the world explode, and how life was so fragile that it shattered the hopes and morale of any troop. Ukrainians and Russians clashed in one of the battles that would forever remain in the memory of their armed forces, with an undeniable victory for Russia and the desperate Ukrainian retreat. The cost in lives was high, with a Russian soldier stating that 16,000 of his comrades perished, while the Ukrainians had lost between 3,500 and 7,000. Pursued and harassed because of this, he surrendered to death with his own weapons, leaving everything of value he had to his battalion. The fact was reported and confirmed by other Russian propagandists. There is something that supports his account. A similar strategy, even with the waves of former prisoners, was used in Bakhmut. After the victory there, Prigozhin himself, leader of the Wagner group, stated that their casualties were 20,000 soldiers killed and about 40,000 wounded. In the midst of so much suffering, there were other men who also had a horrifying story to tell. And among them was Felipe Anísio, a Brazilian who left his country in 2023 to plunge into a hell that would torment even the strongest minds. He joined the Brazilian army in 2011, was discharged in 2012, and in 2014 became part of the Marine Corps. He proudly moved between missions in the Marais complex. His outstanding performance led to his selection for the peacekeeping mission in Haiti, one of the greatest challenges faced by the Brazilian armed forces, fighting against gangs that were disrupting the country's order. Upon return, he resumed service in Rio de Janeiro and finished the corporal training course. He graduated in 2023, when the war in Ukraine had already been going on for over a year. The devil was already walking those lands in the second winter, sowing hatred and reaping bodies. Anísio signed the contract for the city of Kherson, where he carried out missions crossing the river. He was lucky to have a calm passage during that period. Reconnaissance missions where danger was lurking, with the Russians waiting for the Ukrainians to arrive on the banks and trying to send them to hell or back to the other side of the river. The crossings he made were not detected by the drones. Many Ukrainians did not share the same fate. Their boats were continuously pursued by the drones. The kamikazes dove onto the men, tearing apart people and boats. It was Anísio's own decision to leave that area. His brother, a paratrooper in the Brazilian armed forces, arrived in Ukraine and would not stay in the same position as him. He decided to break the contract and sign with the 59th Motorized Brigade of Ukraine. Thus, the two were deployed to Vidivka, in the rare decision of a man to fight alongside his brothers, even in hell. That sentence would be more literal than Anísio himself imagined. Only those who saw it up close, who smelled the stench of the dead and the scent of fire burning metal and flesh during the winter cold, could understand. The first mission given to them seemed like just another routine in hell. to search for an enemy base with 3 Russian and destroy it. The 5 members of the Argo Assault Battalion, among the 59, got ready to move out. They boarded the transport tents, still sharing the jokes and camaraderie of soldiers. The nervous smiles hid the reflection inside each one's heart. Anísio looked at his comrades, gazing at his brother and thinking about his safety. It wasn't distrust. He was a paratrooper. He knew how to take care of himself. But who doesn't worry when someone of their own blood is about to enter hell? With them was also the Brazilian Mancato, a former Marine, a sniper they nicknamed Sarah Connor, and a Ukrainian. The armored vehicle stopped and they got out to start walking through the night. Each of them had a night vision device that they would use to cover the 700 meters to their objective. Anísio realized the trouble they were in with the very first step when Cotonou sank into the freezing mud. The effort it took to pull his foot out was already a sign that not even the earth wanted men to go into that hell. The soldier's mind, however, is stubborn in its mission. All along the front, men struggled to free vehicles from the mud, while the squad would have to free their own feet over those 700 meters. They had to go through 3 checkpoints. They started the walk with the mud already sapping their strength. The route that promised to be easy turned into a sacrifice. Their legs sank, and as they lifted them for the next step, they brought with them the mud and the weight that drained more and more of the energy they would so desperately need. The few moments when they stepped on something solid, it was only by chance if their foot landed on a corpse lost along the way. One of the many abandoned and forgotten soldiers who died following the orders of men who did not understand their sacrifice. The veil of night was torn when the shot of a .50 caliber pierced the darkness, passing over Anísio's head. Thankful for his luck, he called the group to hide. They stood still for a while, with the anti-drone device on, knowing it was their only hope against those flying curses searching for their lives. Fortunately, the Russians' shot was just to try to confirm if anyone was there. They gave up on further attacks. They had been walking through the mud for almost 4 hours just to cover 700 meters. The difficult terrain and the caution to avoid being shot by the enemies made them go slower and slower. Near the last checkpoint, PKM gunfire flew in their direction. Everyone ducked down in concern as the 7.62 projectiles whizzed over their heads. The Ukrainian from the squad shouted the password, making the man at the checkpoint take his finger off the trigger. They had finally arrived. His chest was heaving, pulling in air to try to recover energy from the difficult walk. They looked at the Ukrainians with their marked faces. Anísio was even more certain that he should expect the worst. Anísio was worried. He knew well the basic elements for carrying out a mission. And just as important as knowing how to shoot was having the right reconnaissance and information. One part had already failed so far. He thought about aborting and discussed it with the others. However, the vote to continue was deceiving. He was precise with his words. "Alright, if you want to meet the devil, let's meet the devil." And the devil was waiting. That's why each one took 5 magazines and 5 grenades, adjusted their gear and vests. Anísio looked up at the sky, seeing how the night was already saying goodbye and the sun was coming early to witness what the Brazilian Marines' visit to the devil would be like. One of the Ukrainians, with a weary face and a tired voice, went to show them the location of the mission. His gaze, dimmed by so much death, pointed to the house, but he made a mistake, a slip that sent them in the wrong direction. Anísio led the group, walking at the front while the others tried to avoid bodies lying on the ground and not trip over the rubble. Marks from Russian artillery were scattered everywhere. Remains of corpses in unnatural positions, with twisted or missing limbs, decorated the devil's dreams in Avdiivka. The cold was intense, but the anxiety made Anísio so focused that only the condensed breath coming out of his mouth reminded him of the winter. Daylight hit his face, and worried he turned to check on his companions. That was when he shouted, "Mencato, the mine!" The other Brazilian almost blew himself up. He avoided the problem, but the noise made the Russian come out of one of the houses to check what was happening. Anísio's eyes met the man's, and what was horror for one was the other's certainty that the devil leaned back in his armchair to watch the best part of his movie. The Brazilian raised his rifle, firing a burst that went through the Russian. Quickly they ran toward the house, throwing grenades inside and hearing the successive explosions. One by one, they echoed in the ears of the battalion that went in to finish the clearing. No Russians were seen, only one fleeing unarmed in the distance after the incident. They started heading back quickly. That wasn't the location they were supposed to go to. Even so, there was no time to think about it. The orders were to keep going. They marched quickly until they saw a drone which made them hide. They looked at each other anxiously, knowing what that pest in the air meant. The radio sounded soon after, alerting them that it was their equipment, sent to check on the progress. They returned to walking among the houses in the rural area of Avdiivka. There were no farmers or people. The land only received corpses, like a macabre joke from the devil in which man himself fertilized the war zone. They were in a 5 formation on the street when a Russian appeared in front of Anísio. Both were caught by surprise. The air stopped in their lungs. Time ceased. The finger went to the trigger. The Russian's shots hit the Brazilian on the side, tearing through the flesh until reaching the bones, where the bullet struck to break the limb. The Marine's right arm was already in the air, pulling the trigger as the rifle rose with a burst that started from below and lit up, devouring the Russian's life. Anísio fell to the ground and rolled when he felt yet another shot in the middle of the chaos. The others kept firing, knowing they needed to maintain suppressive fire. To stop shooting would be to allow the bears to keep their confidence and raise their heads to gain fire superiority in the fight. Anísio tried to grab the rifle to shoot, but it wouldn't work, damaged by enemy fire. He tried to reach for the grenades, feeling around his vest and sensing his own blood soaking the gear. His fingers managed to grasp the explosives, but he didn't have the strength in his arm to throw them. The reconnaissance had made a mistake once again. They had been told they would face 3 Russians. There were at least 7 of them there. It was the devil creating wicked twists in the script of life. Livia heard the devil smile in her ear. He was looking and already starting to imagine what another body would look like in the beautiful painting that Vidivka had become. The Russians' gunshots were deafening. The PKNs thundered in the daylight, singing the River of Death for the Marine and his companions. Mencato and someone else held him. He was already dizzy from blood loss. His comrades began the Australian withdrawal, forming a line and firing while the man in front moved to the last position. The new soldier at the front fired in the same way, then announced he would move to the last position in the line. They continued like this until they had fully withdrawn and were safe. But 4 Russians fell to the group's gunfire as they ran for their lives. The artillery started to fall, exploding as the Russian drones began to correct the shots. The ground was shaking, but everything already seemed distant as Anísio's body tried to shut down to rest. It was by sheer willpower that he kept his eyes open until they crawled into a bunker. The kamikaze drones started falling shortly after, smashing against the concrete of the house. The shockwave reached them as a warning that death was hunting them. They spent the whole day in darkness, seeing only the flashes of light announcing what the day was bringing.
Passing Anísio.
He begged to be left there. His strength was fading, with blood mixed into the mud that covered his body. It was cold, seeping into every part of his uniform and hardening on his face. His brother and his companions refused to leave him. They knew that Anísio would slow them down, but they would never abandon him. They had all decided to visit the devil, and after the tense conversation with him, they intended to return together and alive. They dragged him out of the bunker and started walking down the street. They couldn't even run because of the weight of the Marine. The Russian PKM started firing in their direction again. Anísio heard the melody and almost felt as if death was calling him. He fainted halfway, only opening his eyes again when he was in the last bunker. His brother was injured, with the doctor beginning the treatment. The others were fine. They had left hell, and it wasn't the devil who wanted to let them go peacefully. It snowed a lot that night, freezing the mud and allowing them to walk on hard ground where their boots didn't sink. The journey was quick and it saved him from certain death. Anísio knew it was almost his last battle. He almost became one of the lost corpses in the hell of Avdiivka. In that same place, the Brazilian Max Panavo fell, according to the rumors at the time. Each part of those events would not be a memory, it would be a scar in his mind, as deep as those left by gunshots, with as many consequences as broken bones. There was no man who drank with the devil who could forget the conversation or his laughter. And the way things were going, the devil would have company for many more conversations yet.